Okay, great. First of all, thanks, Zena, for inviting me to come along to talk today. I'm super excited to be able to talk about neurodiversity, the strengths and busting the myths, as it says here. But really with the slant of thinking about that innovation and really why this topic is so important to the world of innovation, to creating those ideas and really making things happen. So just a little bit about me. So as Zena said, I worked in pharmaceutical company previously, moved into learning and development, and absolutely love being able to enable people to do things differently. So Beacon Mental Health Training is around 9 years old this year. And I've worked with lots of different companies, you can see there on the right hand side, really supporting them with their mental health and neurodiversity strategies. So I'm accredited as a Mental Health First Aid England instructor and also a CPD Thrive neurodiversity instructor as well. And I also volunteer my time with my wonderful Labrador, Max, you can see there, as a therapy dog through Canine Concern. And we support people's mental health in lots of different ways by visiting various places, mainly care home. And the residents there absolutely love seeing Max as much as Max loves seeing them as well. So that's just some of the things that I do in my spare time as a volunteer to really boost that mental health support in the community. So why does this subject matter so much? Why does this topic of neurodiversity matter? It seems to have exploded just recently. Everyone seems to be talking about neurodiversity, but just like mental health exploded about 10 years ago, we need to make sure this doesn't end up being a tick box exercise. This needs to make sure that when we're talking about neurodiversity and neuro-inclusive workplaces, that we actually have action, we make things happen to really move away from a tick box and see company success. So about 1 in 5 people are expected to be neurodiverse. But when we've got waiting lists of over 10 years of people, waiting for diagnosis, we know this figure potentially could be a lot higher. And another thing that's really important to recognise is that about 65% of employees won't disclose actually that they think that they might be neurodifferent because of the fear of discrimination. And when we think about then the consequences of having, 20% of our workforce being neurodiverse, and if we don't realise it, and if we're not supporting that neuro-inclusive nature, and also we've got 65% of our neuro diverse individuals who aren't telling us, then we can't support, we can't make that difference, and we can't enable people to thrive. So for businesses to ensure they have a strategic edge, for businesses to make sure that they're one step ahead of their competition, they must have a neurodiverse workforce. We must include and have neuro-inclusivity, because innovation, creativity, and problem solving are all key to business success. We know this. This is why we're part of this innovation hub, part of Ideas UK, because we understand the importance of this. So let me just go back a step then, because I want to make sure everyone understands what it is that we actually are talking about here. So when we talk about neurodiversity in the workplace, what is it that we're actually talking about? And it's really important that we recognise that actually it's everyone, because neurodiversity means everyone's brains working differently, working together to be able to come up with some amazing ideas, amazing solutions to have that strategic edge. So if we think of biodiversity, and we know that that's all living things, different ecosystems, species, organisms, all coming together, all playing their role in this big planet that we live in. So when we think about neurodiversity, it's important that we appreciate everyone's brains are different and they'll all work in different ways. However, the way that the majority of people's brains process information can be different to a minority. So we have two subgroups. So we have the neuromajority, so how most people process the world around them, the information that comes in. So they're classed as neurotypical because the majority of people think like this. So that's typically how most people think. We then have neurominority. So this is where there's a smaller group of individuals who process the information, the world around them differently. And so they are divergent from the typical path. So these are the neurominority, or we can call them neurodivergent or neurodifferent. Okay, so those words are absolutely fine to use, neurodivergent or neurodifferent. Now, within this neurominority group, again, we have subgroups. And this is where we have groups of individuals that share very similar experiences. How they process the world and information can be slightly different to a different subgroup. And these are the neurotypes. So this is autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome. These are the different neurotypes. And what's important to recognise is often these different neurotypes don't travel alone. They actually co-occur with other areas. So often someone with autism may well have ADHD as well. Somebody with dyslexia may well have dyscalculia. So actually there is a massive co-occurrence across these different neurotypes. But what's really important is that just because they're different and they process the world differently doesn't mean it's wrong or that these brains are broken. Okay, it's just different, not broken. And actually they're only classed as neurodivergent because we've decided the majority is the typical way. So the challenges that we often face through being neurodifferent is just because the world generally, businesses are set up for the majority of people. So if we think back to left-handed and right-handed people, at one point years ago, if you were left-handed, you were seen as wrong and broken. There was something wrong with you. You were forced to use your right hand. Now we realise that's absolutely ridiculous. But we put things in place, recognizing that if somebody is left-handed, maybe they don't sit next door to somebody who's right-handed because their elbows will clash. Maybe we give them left-handed scissors because actually right-handed scissors, which is what generally people use, because generally most people are right-handed, don't work for someone who's left-handed. So actually, when we recognize that someone who's left-handed isn't broken, it's just different, we can start to see, actually, this is very similar now with neurodiversity as well. I can see some things coming in the chat. So what I'll say is if anyone has got any questions, please do put them in the chat. That's fine. I'm not sure whether that was a question or not. I'm not going to check the chat yet. Zena and Helen will have a little look at the chat for me. And at the end, I'll certainly answer any questions for anybody. So when we think about the fundamentals of what neurodiversity means, it means everybody. But when the business world or the world around us is set up for neuromajority, we can see that how actually some people are going to struggle and going to have challenges. So when we make a neuro-inclusive world, a new neuro-inclusive business, this means that actually we're enabling every brain to strive and thrive and be at their best. And that's what we're wanting. So let's think about some strengths then. So what the strength for cognitive diversity? So having all these different ways of thinking and processing coming together, it's going to enhance problem solving. Innovative thinking, so important. Creativity, ability to be to have those risk-taking behaviours. Big picture thinking, visual thinkers, be able to break that herd mentality. The conceptual expansion of ideas, pattern recognition, verbal communication, resilience and agility, hyperfocus, retaining facts and the important information that people say, and expanding customer experiences. And when we think about autism, ADHD, dyslexia as sort of the three more common, as we know, neurodifferences, they really do come into their own when you look at these cognitive diversity strengths. So the visual thinkers, people with autism, can hear something, can hear an idea, and they can picture it. They can often really sort of expand that idea. And that idea can really run away because with them and come up with all those different ideas. The risk taking, we know that there's lots of entrepreneurs out there who have ADHD because they see an idea and they are willing to take that risk and go for it and put it out there. And you know what? If there's a problem that needs solving, that's fine. They'll do that. They have high levels of resilience and agility. If something doesn't work, how do we change that? When we think of the importance of that innovative thinking, how do I create one idea and come up with loads more ideas just from that one pinpoint? And again, ADHD enables you to do that. Dyslexia, amazing verbal communication, that pattern recognition, being able to spot things that again other people may not see. The hyper focus. I could go on. I think you can get the feeling that I could go on for a while about the strengths of this cognitive diversity. Yet, because of the way society views or an unhelpful media presence, we often only see the challenges. So for inclusive organisations, okay, they're 75% more likely to see new ideas productised. Innovation from cognitive diversity will improve decision making by 87%, and this is driving higher revenue. So we're here talking about innovation and how do we be innovative? How do we have those ideas? Well, we have them because we use everyone's brains. We don't treat people as, well, you're different and so you don't fit in with how we do things. How do we create that environment where we enable everybody to come together to be successful? So I just want to share some myths which I think are so important. And I mentioned, the media presence or the really unhelpful social views, and just want to, there's loads, but just to touch on some of the myths here. So everyone is on the spectrum. The amount of times I hear people saying that, and yeah, everybody may well share at some point in their life some similar traits to somebody else. And I often think of it as a kaleidoscope. So how we turn up on a certain day and how that kaleidoscope of shapes that might happen because of how we're feeling, of how we slept that night, how we managed to get into work, whether there was roadworks, whether someone said good morning to us or not, whether somebody was kind to us or whatever it might be. How our kaleidoscope shows up may well at some point overlap with somebody else's kaleidoscope. And that's likely to happen, absolutely likely to happen. But it doesn't mean that just because you have the same trait, the same experience at one point, that you share things in the same way. And I always joke that for any men that might be watching now, if I ask you, have you ever had indigestion? Have you ever put on a little bit of weight around your middle that you've not wanted? It doesn't mean you're pregnant. You may well share some similarities and some traits with somebody who is pregnant, doesn't mean you are. And that's that same thing, that kaleidoscope of similarities that may cross over and that may be similar, doesn't mean that it's because of the same reasons, doesn't mean it's because of the same intensity or the same consequences. So no, not everybody is on the spectrum. You may well share some traits, and often people say to me, I have ADHD, and a lot of people say when I talk about I've got lots of notebooks and I have lots of ideas and my to-do list is never ending, and people go, oh yes, that's the same as me, because other people have to-do lists. Yes, you will have a to-do list, but how you feel about your to-do list, how you tackle your to-do list, how you share those ideas on your to-do list will be maybe very different to how I do with my ADHD brain. So yes, just because we may have to-do lists doesn't mean that we all have ADHD. So again, it's just really important to understand we're not all on the spectrum. Dyslexics are just lazy or intellectually challenged, so can't read and write, or can't be bothered to read and write. Oh my goodness, absolutely not. We know that dyslexics are, work twice as hard as neurotypicals to get to the same endpoint when it comes to having to read and write. It's not that they can't, it's that there's a decoding issue. If I was to give you a page of hieroglyphics, it doesn't mean you can't understand it. If I was to give you the right materials to decode it, it would take you a lot longer. And if somebody was to read out what those hieroglyphics meant, it wouldn't be that you don't understand it. You'd be able to process it and perhaps come up with ideas around it. Doesn't mean you're intellectually challenged because you can't read those hieroglyphics. And it's the same with dyslexia. It's a decoding issue. So people can read and write, they find it difficult to process those letters. They do it differently. ADHD isn't real, or it's caused by too much sugar or E numbers. It is absolutely real. We've seen it in brain scans where it's the connectivity of the nerves around the brain. They may go too slow or too quick. They may even go via a number of different places before they get to the point they're meant to get to. But we know it's absolutely real, and it isn't caused by too much sugar or E numbers. That said, we know that environment, we know that diet plays a massive role into the intensity and how ADHD plays out. So there is a link, but it doesn't cause it. It's a neurological connectivity difference. Autism is caused by vaccines. This has been disproven time and time again, and hopefully that's one that won't keep being said, because we know it is absolutely not true. Neurodiverse individuals want special privileges. This is the new bag back. This is the new stress card. Oh, someone's got ADHD. They don't want to be able to, they can't do something. Having a neurodifference is not an excuse to not do your job. Absolutely not. But actually, what we do need to do is make sure there's somebody who, if we use the left-handed, right-handed, isn't trying to be forced to use right-handed scissors, because they don't work for a left-handed person. So actually, what we need to make sure people who are neurodiverse have the right equipment, the right environment for them to be able to thrive. So they don't want lower work expectations. They want to achieve and do, and in most cases they can achieve more given the right environment and the right opportunity. And lastly, all neurodiverse people have superpowers. Again, no, it's not about having superpowers. It's just about understanding strengths and leveraging those strengths. And again, it's important that we understand and don't. The first one there, everyone's on the spectrum. People often use that to try and include people. Well, we're all alike, aren't we? And then again, if somebody often uses that, oh, that's your superpower, because again, they're trying to lift them up and trying to boost them. But actually, we don't need to do that, because we just need to understand that we all, whether we're neurotypical or neurodifferent, we all have our own strengths. We all have different abilities. And just because a neurotypical is very good at something, I don't necessarily have to turn around and say that's your superpower. We wouldn't do that. So it's not about classing strengths as superpowers. It's about understanding that actually we all have different ways of doing things, and we have different strengths. So we do have strengths, but also there are challenges, and it's important, and I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but around executive function and how the brain works differently around the prefrontal cortex, and those executive function differences around planning and organisation, around impulsivity, lots of different things that can cause challenges. It can absolutely affect people's mental health because of the high levels of anxiety that people often feel who are neurodivergent, because of the expectations of having to live in a neurotypical world. Communication, how people communicate, either how they receive the information or they deliver it. Again, we need to understand how to communicate more effectively from both a neurotypical and a neurodiverse perspective. How people feel and receive the environment around them. Again, understanding that how whether people read those social cues, those unwritten rules of how close to stand to somebody. A lot of people, so the majority of people have this rule book they seem to get given when they're born of how close are you meant to get to somebody, how loud are you meant to talk, how much you're meant to wait until you say something to somebody else. And actually quite often neurodivergent people don't have that rule book. They don't know how to read that rule book to be able to do that. So it's understanding the world around them is different. And senses, things can be brighter, scratchier, louder. And again, understanding how the world is felt is really important to understand how to help people thrive in the workplace. And emotionally as well, how emotional regulation can be very different for people who are neurodiverse. So again, understanding the emotional impact the different senses can have around them. You know, if you have an open plan office and you've got somebody who's eating something or making a coffee, and you can smell the coffee, you can hear the coffee machine whirring, you've got three people having a conversation about something really important, but a meeting they attended last week, but you weren't a part of it, you've got somebody else on the phone, all these senses, and you're trying to concentrate and do some work. Actually, you could be really emotionally charged, and then something else happens and you snap and you shout and you say something, because actually you're already at a 10 with everything that's going around you. So it's important just to recognize the different challenges that people can face. But you know what I've just explained there about that office space isn't just because someone's neurodifferent. Neurotypicals can be sat in the office, have something really, really important to do, and three people are talking about a meeting that they weren't bothered about. Somebody else is making a really loud noise with a coffee grinder, this, that, and the other, and you just need a quiet space to work. So being able to understand actually a lot of things we can do in the workplace will not only support and help neurodivergent people to thrive, but it will help neurotypicals to thrive and give them options as well. So what are the consequences then? So if we have unsupported neurodivergent individuals, the consequences are huge. If we don't have an environment where they feel psychologically safe to be able to show up and be themselves, then we're not going to have all those strengths that we talked about on that other slide, and there was many of them. They're not going to be able to be at their best, which is going to then heighten probably their emotions, their poor mental health, because they're not able to be themselves, and they're having to suppress and mask massively. If we don't support managers to be able to support their teams, then again, we're not going to get that strategic edge. We're not going to be able to deliver what we're trying to deliver. We're going to have teams that aren't working together. So we absolutely need to make sure we support managers in understanding neurodiversity, how we can bring people together and work effectively, because all this will have a huge impact on the workplace. I shared some of those figures earlier on, some of those statistics of how successful people can be. And we know that neuro-inclusive workplaces are 30% more productive. And it's so important that, we make those changes, that we don't just let the status quo carry on. We don't think, oh, neurodiversity, this is the new craze that everyone's talking about. Yeah, okay, it'll pass. Actually, this matters. And when we're talking about innovation, creativity, it potentially matters even more. So what can you do then? So some things, I've a lot of information at you. So what can you do? So check your policies. Do you have a neuro-inclusive policy? Do you think about, your recruitment process? Are you missing out on some amazing people because your recruitment process isn't allowing for somebody to actually even be at their best in interview? Understand how you can make company-wide reasonable adjustments that will help everybody. So not just neurotypicals, or neurodiverse, but actually everybody alike. And there's some really simple, cost-neutral things that you can consider that will absolutely, support everybody. And the company-wide awareness training to allow everybody to understand how to work effectively with each other, to be able to advocate for neurodiverse employees so they don't feel like they have to hide away. How do you encourage people to talk and to be proud about actually the strengths that they can deliver, that they can bring? Yes, there's challenges, so how can you support them with them? So company-wide training initiatives and specific people manager training, because actually it's the managers that often need to talk about those reasonable adjustments. And if they don't know how to do that, if they have no idea what those reasonable adjustments could be, they don't know even how to speak to somebody, or worried about, can I ask somebody if they're neurodiverse? Can I ask them this? How do I create an environment where people will speak up? Then actually all these stats, all these strengths that I've talked about, it's just going to, blow away into the ether somewhere. And it's such a shame, because we've got such an opportunity here to support everybody and to enable everybody to thrive. But it'll only happen if we take action, if we invest in training, if we invest in people, for them to be at their best. So how can you get in touch? So if this is something that you'd like to talk about more, or I've only had half an hour and my ADHD brain could have gone in so many different directions with this. If you want to talk about it some more, then I love talking about this stuff. I don't know whether you can tell. So I've got my website and my email address on the screen. You can also link in with me on LinkedIn. And if you do that, please, when you drop me a message just to let me know that you've been on this webinar, and any thoughts that you've got. I love to. You'll be great when people connect with me. How and why have you connected with me? And if you're interested in any of the other training courses that that I do around neurodiversity or mental health, then again, just like a chat with you to see how it would fit in with your organisation, because hopefully, as I've demonstrated, this stuff matters. Zena, are there any questions?
Well, there are indeed, Amanda. And first off, thank you so much, because that was such a clear, impassioned, important presentation. So I really appreciate that you kind of sharing with us today. So thank you so much. And we do have questions already in the chat. So if anyone also wants to come off mute in a minute and ask Amanda any questions, then please do. But to just go through some of the questions in the chat. So the first one was kind of a question slash comment from Nicola. What are the chances in the future that neurodivergence will be in the neuro majority?
Oh, I love that question. So, in some cases and in some organizations, neuro-different actually is the neuro majority. So in some cases, when you go into I don't know, I don't want to be too generalistic, but there's some hobbies or some a friend of mine plays like a Dungeons and Dragons type game, and the majority of people are neurodiverse who are there. So they're not in the minority, they are the majority. So actually people who are neurotypical in our situation, what we're talking, actually are the minority. So it's a really interesting question, and one I honestly don't know the answer to. But I think we need to get to a point where we don't necessarily need to worry whether somebody is in the majority or the minority, because actually we can talk and be inclusive regardless. So, oh yeah, I love that question. I could talk about that for hours. I don't know is the answer, but thank you for asking it, because it's got my brain going, woo.
Thanks, Amanda. Next question from Connor. If you had a unique way of working or software that works for your neurodiversity, how do you convince an employer to give you the leeway to use it?
So if I think so somebody who's neurodivergent has some software they think that would be useful for them. How do you get your
Yes.
employee to use it? Okay, so
Yeah.
so you don't have, so as part of the Equality Act, neurodiversity or neurodivergence is classed as a disability. So even though it's difficult to go down, we don't really want to go down a medical model because it's not something that can be cured, and we don't want to cure neurodiversity, or neurodivergence, should I say. So it's not something that has to actually be, you don't have to have a diagnosis to ask for reasonable adjustments. So that's the first thing to say. You don't actually have to have a formal diagnosis. You can go to your employer, and you can either say that you feel that you may be ADHD, autistic, or whatever it might be, but you don't have to. But actually, for you to do your job, this is what you'd like them to consider. And to have that conversation. Now, access to work is a great starting point as well to get a grant. So your workplace can use access to work, which is a government initiative to support neurodiversity in the workplace. And there's various different hoops you need to jump through, but they can absolutely look down that avenue. Every workplace has to consider what you ask for. Whether they deem it as a reasonable adjustment, if it's something that's going to cause them a lot of financial investment, and actually that is not balanced with how much income someone brings in, then actually that wouldn't then be a reasonable adjustment. But actually, they have to look at it as a reasonable adjustment. It's the law. So actually having a conversation, and if you can demonstrate how it's going to help you and how you're going to be doing your job better, or then actually you'd like to think that a company would consider it. So having a conversation, and also realizing that actually reasonable adjustments have to be taken into consideration as well.
Thanks, Amanda. And I guess also that comes back to your point about training managers too, because I know as a manager, I would want to do anything I could to support my team to be at the best in whichever kind of way that happens. So I guess that point of kind of training managers around
So
this topic
important.
is so critical as well.
It is. And I think it's also managers not feeling the burden of having to um, have it all on their shoulders. But as a
Yeah.
manager, if you can create a psychologically safe environment where people will come and talk to you and open up, because if you're not psychic, as much as you want to support your staff, if you don't know that somebody is struggling and they're masking, and then they're off for 6 months on stress, you would have done something about it, but you didn't realize. So sometimes it's about creating those avenues of conversation and removement of judgment. Even though you may not judge, they may not know that. So it's how do you have those conversations, and that's so important.
Yeah, thank you. I think this question came up around when you were talking about the cognitive diversity strengths.
Right.
And it was how can neurodiversity help to challenge assumptions and spark disruptive innovation?
Oh, well, I
Big
think
question.
it's a great question. I mean, one of the strengths I wrote down there was expands customers' experiences. And I think, when we think about IKEA, that was developed by a young boy who really struggled at school with autism, wasn't understood, thought differently, and decided he couldn't carry on at school. He needed to do something different and created IKEA. So IKEA are his initials, EA are the places where he lived. IKEA was born. And the concept of the flat pack furniture and everything that went with it just disrupted the idea of how we do things, the status quo. I talked about the challenges with communication. Autistic people want straightforward communication. They give honest feedback, and sometimes that offends people because they're like, oh well, hang on a minute, you know but sometimes honest communication gets stuff done quicker rather than around dancing in a circle, being all nice to each other because you don't want to offend somebody. So actually understanding and creating an environment where we want honest, open communication can stop you going down an avenue for a few days because actually, oh, you know, it's a nice thing. And it can, and that herd mentality again, I put on the strength of cognitive diversity because, yes, if we're all going down, you know, we've all got this one way of thinking, and somebody goes, "Hang on a minute, have we thought about doing it this way?" Well, no, we've never done it that way. And well, why haven't we ever done it that way? And again, that difference within that thinking process can really stop things in their tracks and go, well, hang on a minute, that's so different. We've not thought about it. We don't know how we're going to do it, but let's now get our heads together around that. And I think that you'll only get that if you allow people, that's again that psychological safety to go, hang on a minute, I don't think that's right. How about we try it this way? And I think it's crucial. It's crucial for businesses.
Yeah. And I guess that's on all of us as kind of innovation managers to think about how do we communicate? Like your slides are very clear, they're uncluttered, you know, the content's very clear, whereas we tend to use pictures and colors and this and that. Um, and it's like, how do we simplify things perhaps to really
Absolutely.
enable everyone to become involved, and what mechanisms can we put in place ourselves to allow
Yeah.
everyone to feel that they can participate as well?
Absolutely. And my slides were a bit more cluttered than I'd normally have them, to be honest, but trying to get everything across in half an hour was quite a lot. But actually it's not a white background. My slides are a light green because
Yes.
actually for dyslexics, white on black, very sorry, black on white, it's harder to read. So just changing the background of my slides just enables people who you know who might be dyslexic here to be able to read that easier. I haven't had to change it and go, okay, I'll send this out. Whoever's dyslexic, let me know. I'll change the slides for you, and we'll keep it as white for everybody else because it doesn't matter to other people what color they are, but to some people it does. So let's just, and that's one of those reasonable adjustments that you can just make that's cost neutral, that you can just enable it just be inclusive for everybody.
That's a really good shout, actually, Amanda. I should be doing that too. And final one from Karen is around what support do you offer, Amanda, to kind of support neurodivergent people and their colleagues in the workplace? So this is a bit
So
about what do you offer?
yeah, absolutely. So I support businesses around their sort of their neuro-inclusivity and their mental health sort of inclusivity, around the awareness training. And I love working with managers to really, you know, enable them to understand and actually the managers that are neuro different as well, because again, it's important to lead by example because quite often people don't feel they're going to get promoted because they're thinking differently, they're doing things differently, so they need to, you know, play the game, and only when they've managed to mask enough and get to a high enough level where they may then go, actually, you know what, I am ADHD, but I haven't told anybody because I thought it might hamper my, you know, my process or my progress. But actually we need people to shout about their differences to really encourage other people, and that's what I help champion, help that advocacy within an organization, um, so people can self-advocate, but also so people around them can advocate as well. So yeah, so I run training courses, and I also support, so if organizations often have sort of mental health champions, neurodiversity champions, and again, so I help them with what they can do, and sort of a bit of mentoring around actually, you know, keeping the motivation going, because sometimes these smaller subgroups can be quite difficult to get traction.
Amanda. So they were all the questions that we had in chat. As I say, definitely generated a number of questions. Unless anyone has any final questions, then you're welcome to um, come off mute. So just give a second for that. Otherwise, clearly all those questions went, oh yeah. One more question. Is there a self-test to know if the person has kind of any of these kind of differences, I guess?
So
So is
there
there a test you could do online?
Yeah, so uh if you feel that you may have something like ADHD, then you can go on to I'm going to say ADHD UK, a reputable charity website, and they'll give you ways that you can do some self tests. I think, um, unfortunately, the NHS is really struggling around getting tested. Like I say, there's 10 years waiting lists. So, I said I have ADHD. I haven't got a formal diagnosis because I'm in I'm in that cycle of waiting. So I could go privately, and that costs quite a lot of money to go privately. Do I feel do I need a diagnosis? Not necessarily, because actually, obviously I work for myself, but if I had an employer, I know that I don't need a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis, to actually ask for some support. Um, but also it's recognizing, well, what are my challenges, understanding them, and then putting things in. So as in, I'm really time blind. As in, I really struggle with my quarter twos, quarter pasts. I'm often late, an hour late or an hour early for things, or I just leave the house when I should be arriving. So I've sort of, I can't use that as an excuse for my clients. I can't say, oh, well, I'm really sorry I was late for an hour, but I have ADHD. That's not going to fly. Of course it isn't. I can't use it as an excuse. So I've got things in place. I've got timers, buzzers, calendars that pop up. I have a brilliant husband in our social setting that reminds me, Amanda, we've only got half an hour. Do you think you need to get yourself ready? Oh my goodness, yes, I do. I've got things in place to be able to support me, because I have object permanence. If things aren't around me, I forget about them. So I've got whiteboards everywhere. You can't see them behind me, but I have whiteboards that remind me of things to do, because then I get things done, and I'm really successful. I've been running my business for 9 years. So it's about, do you need a formal diagnosis? Not necessarily. Some people may feel they need one. There are sort of ways that you can do some self tests online, absolutely. But just be mindful of the sites that you go on, which is what I'd say. That was a really long-winded
Amazing.
way of answering that question, sorry.
No, that was fine, Amanda. And I think we've got quite a few colleagues from the UAE on the line. And again, I'm sure kind of privately you'd be able to kind of investigate and understand and gain those diagnoses if you feel. But equally, like you said, it's about self-awareness
Yes,
and understanding where your potential triggers or how you
absolutely.
operate, and be able to put in, like you do, those coping mechanisms to ensure life works for you.
But I also think that the world is set up to identify our challenges, to identify
Yeah,
our downfalls, to identify, but actually, yes, it's good to be self-aware of the things you're finding a challenge, but don't dismiss all your great strengths.
lovely.
It's so important, else you go down a rabbit hole. And that's why mental health can be a real struggle, because we only see our challenges, and I'm a failure at that and I'm useless at that. We need to stop and go, actually, hang on a minute here. Yes, I find these a challenge, that I can put things in place to help with them, but actually I'm brilliant at this, and this is what I bring to the
Lovely.
party, and this is what people need to self-advocate for, and that is so important.
That's lovely. That balanced reflection, not only picking up on our challenges, but actually what we're great at too, which
Yeah.
we're all rubbish at doing. So
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. That's, yeah, for neurodiverse, neurotypical alike, everybody needs to understand their strengths, and advocate for themselves. Really important.
thank you. And I think that is a perfect place to stop. So thank you again, Amanda. Really appreciate it. Thank you for all of you for joining, and we hope you'll join us next month for another interesting topic. So thank you again, and yeah, look forward to seeing you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.